Hi and welcome. My name is Julieanne Kost, and in the next few minutes we're going to take a look at the 3 tools in Lightroom that you can use to selectively adjust your images. So we'll begin right here with this image, and I just want to darken down the kind of lower left-hand corner here. So I'm going to use the graduated filter. Now, the moment that I click on the graduated filter, I see a lot of different options. I can't quite see them all, so I'm going to toggle my histogram to just make that panel smaller. And now we can go ahead and look at all of the different attributes that I can load in my graduated filter. And this list of attributes will be very familiar in the next few minutes because they're the same list that I can also load in my radial filter and also my adjustment brush. So we have all sorts of options like temperature and tint, exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, clarity, and saturation, as well as the ability to either increase or decrease sharpness, noise, moire, and defringing. So I want to reset this quickly, and we know that we can double click on a single attribute's name in order to reset that single slider, but you can also double click where it says Effect, and that will reset all of the sliders at one time. So it's up to you whether or not you want to preload the graduated filter with different adjustments. In this case I do. I simply want to decrease the exposure. Of course, moving the slider doesn't do anything. It's just loading the graduated filter with that decrease in exposure. Now I'll start here in the lower left, and I'm going to click and start dragging up into my image. And what we can see is we've got a pin here in the center. The pin is used to drag to reposition the graduated filter. And then the lines on the outside can be used to adjust the length, basically, of the gradient. And the gradient goes from the attribute being fully loaded down here where I started to drag it, and it starts fading off so that there's no effect by the time it reaches this other outer white line. Now, if I want to rotate this, I can position my cursor anywhere on the middle line. You'll notice that I didn't go right towards the pen because a very small movement here is going to make a big adjustment, and things can kind of get out of control a little bit too quickly. Instead, I'll move far away from the pen, and then I'll click and drag in order to make a much more controlled rotation. So I'm just going to drag this down a little bit more and maybe just shorten it up a bit. And the great thing about the graduated filter is, just like anything in Lightroom's Develop module, everything here is non-destructive. So, of course, I could just tap the Delete key and get rid of this filter, but all I really need to do is make an adjustment. I don't quite want so much of a darkening effect, so I'm going to click on the exposure slider and just move it over to the right a little bit so that I'm just getting a slight decrease in exposure. And if I want to toggle this on and off to see what it looks like, there's a little switch icon down here at the bottom. We can see a little before and after. I still think that it's a little bit too dark, so I'm going to decrease the exposure a little bit more, and then again preview that before and after. And the nice thing about this toggle switch, as opposed to actually tapping the Y key and going to before and after, is that this is showing me all of the changes that I've made. If I tap the Y key to bring back this single image view and just use the light switch here, it's only showing me the changes that I've made with a graduated filter. All right, let's add a secondary graduated filter. In this case, I want to darken down the sky, so I'm going to click right about here in the sky area and just click and drag down. And you can see it's actually applied the same effect that I had loaded with that previous graduated filter. In order to change that, obviously I can come back now and make additional adjustments. So I might want to add a little bit of contrast in the sky. Now you'll notice when you do make large changes, sometimes you're also going to see a change in color or in the amount of saturation. So I'm also going to come down and just decrease the saturation a little bit, get rid of some of that blue in the clouds. I might add a little bit of clarity. Again, that's going to give me just a little bit more contrast, but it's going to do the contrast around the edges, specifically in the mid-tone areas. And now again, we can see a little before and after here of this rather large change that we're making to the sky. And finally, if I wanted to add a little bit of color into that sky, I can use this color swatch here. I can click on that, then we can just load in whatever color we want. In this case, I'm going to make it a really subtle change, so I might just add maybe 5% of a color. And in this case, I'm just going to bring it over a little bit towards the pinks here. And then again, we can toggle that on and off. Excellent. So that is the graduated filter in Lightroom. Let's go ahead and switch to another image here, and I'm going to choose the radial filter here to make a change. So just like we saw a moment ago, you want to load up the tool with whatever parameters you want. In this case, I'm going to decrease the exposure like we did before, and then I'll click and drag from the center. And immediately what you saw was everything outside of the radial filter became darker. It actually became a -1 exposure because that's what I had set here. But sometimes it's a little confusing when you first start using the tool because the expectation might be that what you're changing is on the inside when in fact by default it's on the outside. Of course, we can change that by just inverting the mask, clicking right here, but I actually want to darken down the edges. So basically what I've created is kind of an off-center vignette. And of course, if I position my cursor in the preview area or in the image area, I can then use the pen in the center in order to reposition this and move it around. I can also change the size by simply clicking on any of these white anchor points. Of course, if I do turn this into an oval, then if I position my cursor anywhere over the white line, we can go ahead and rotate that if we want to. I'm going to go ahead and make that a little bit larger though and keep it as a circle. If you want it as an exact circle, then you can hold down the Shift key when you're dragging out the radial filter, and that will constrain it to a circle. And of course, if I feel that this adjustment is too much, we can come back to the exposure and I can just decrease the darkening there of the area outside, just make it a little bit less obvious. And of course, I could add additional radial filters if I want to, but that is basically how the tool works. All right, let's move again to another image here, and this time I'm going to switch over to my adjustment brush. Now the thing that's great about the adjustment brush is that you can paint it anywhere you want, so you're not limited to either a gradient or to a circle. So for example, if I wanted to darken down the icebergs, the smaller icebergs here, to kind of make them recede a little bit and to change the focus so that it's on these larger icebergs, again, I'll set it up with a negative exposure, and then I can start painting. Now, why is mine painting red? It's because I have the overlay turned on, and I must have turned that on previously. So in order to toggle the overlay, you just tap the O key. The O key is basically showing us the mask. If you wanted a menu item for that, we can see here that if you go underneath Tools and go to the Adjustment Brush Overlay, I'm overlaying this mask in red, and I can just tap the O key if I want to hide that. All right, so I definitely think that I am actually applying too heavy of an effect here, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and just move quickly and make all of these changes, and then I can always come back to it and change the exposure by moving the slider here. Now, to get a larger or smaller brush quickly, I can scroll down and change the size here, but I can also just use the left bracket key in order to get a smaller brush, or I can use the right bracket key in order to get a larger brush. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time here doing this, but I think you get the effect is that I'm actually dodging or burning in my image based on whether or not I load this with a darker or lighter value. And again, I think that's going a little bit too far, so let's just back off on the amount of exposure. All right, so let's say we like that, but I want to also change the color here of these front icebergs because they're looking a little bit yellow. So I have to be very careful when I use this tool, only in that if I start making changes now, of course, it's just going to edit the brush stroke that's already there. If I want to create a new pin, I need to click on the new icon right here. And in this case, I'm going to reset exposure by double clicking on it. And let's just try to take the temperature down a little bit. I'm moving it a little bit towards blue. Of course, we're not seeing anything appear in the image area yet because I actually need to paint with this in order to make the change. So I'll use that right arrow brush, and we can really see that I have made way too drastic a change here. But that's okay because, like I said, we're just kind of preloading the brush there with the adjustment. And then I can go in and I can make changes. Now, I've painted a little too far out here, so I need to switch over to my eraser tool. Right here, I can just click where it says erase, and then I can just click and drag over that area so that we don't see that blue appearing. But again, I took the temperature down way too much, so let's just bring that up a little bit more maybe right to about here. And I also think it needs to go a little bit greener. So we'll go ahead and bring that over. Now that might be a little too blue, but that's all right. I'll take that as a creative effect. Now, if I wanted to go back in and make an adjustment to, say, the first pin, then when I position my cursor on top of the image area, we can see this is the pin that's changing the color, and if I hover over it, it shows me the mask. This is the pin that's actually darkening down the background. So I'm going to click on that pen in order to activate it again, and I'm just going to paint over this back piece of ice here. It was a little too distracting to have it light, so now the focus is more on these three in the foreground here. And don't forget, it's not just the exposure you could change. If I want to go in here and really bring down the shadow area, I can do that independently. I could go in and decrease the clarity maybe if I wanted to kind of soften this area, or I could decrease the sharpening. You can really add as many of these different attributes to any single brush stroke or to the radial filter or the graduated filter as well. And right here where it says Effects, where it says Custom to the right, if you are constantly setting up your tools in specific ways, like maybe you just have one that dodges a little bit because you use that to lighten someone's eyes, or maybe you have one that dodges or it increases exposure and it also desaturates, maybe to whiten someone's teeth or something, you can click where it says Custom here, and you'll notice that there's actually some presets that have been saved. Now these ship with Lightroom, but you could come down at any point in time and you could save the current settings as a new preset. So basically you're saving all of the different attributes that you've assigned to a tool, and I'll just call this Test for now. And we'll click Create. But the great thing about this effect is regardless of the adjustment tool I'm using, it will always be accessible. So if I move over to the radial filter, you can see that I could quickly move back and forth, maybe between a little dodge, and look at now my exposure's just increased a little bit, and then we could come back and I could go back to the test. You can see that it sets all of those attributes at once. So anytime that you're loading any of these tools with the same settings over and over again, just click here and save those settings as a new preset. So one of the things that I forgot to mention is down here under the brush area, you'll notice that there's an option for flow. I have that flow set at 100%. So every time I painted, I got 100% of the effect laid down on top of my image. But if I want to be a little bit more subtle and take a little bit more time and slowly build up maybe a lightening of an area or a darkening of an area, then I can just move this flow way down to the left, and now it'll take multiple strokes in order to apply the effects that I have loaded in the brush. So it's a much more subtle and gradual way of building up a change. And finally, although this isn't really an adjustment tool, I am going to switch over to this last image because I want to show you how easy it is to remove not only dust spots, but also unwanted objects in Lightroom. So I've just selected the spot removal tool, and we can see that it's got the ability to clone or make an exact copy of one area and put it in another area. And in this case, I don't want to make an exact duplicate. I want to actually heal this so that Lightroom will blend the colors for me. So again, I can use that right bracket key in order to get a little bit larger of a brush, and I can actually paint and start here and just click and drag down over that person. And when I release the cursor, Lightroom will go ahead and select from a region nearby, take that good information, basically the information without the person, and copy it and paste it on top of it, and then blend in those edges for me. I also noticed that I have a dust spot in the sky up here, so I'll go ahead and click on it once. But there's another great tool that I should mention called Visualize Spots. And if I check that on, you can see that I get this great high contrast preview of my image, and you can actually see that I have a ton of dust spots in the sky. And I can actually change this contrast here to see even more dust spots. So now to remove all these dust spots in the sky, it's as easy as just clicking on top of each one of them. So this is really handy because otherwise I probably would have missed all those little dust spots in the cloud area because they were so subtle. I'll go ahead and turn that off. And we can see how many of the adjustments I just made. Of course, the H key for all of these tools will hide the interface. Tapping the H key again will bring back the interface. And if we need to zoom in, we can use the keyboard shortcuts Command plus or Control plus on Windows, or Control minus and Command minus on Mac to zoom back out. Excellent. That wraps up how you can enhance isolated areas in your images. My name's Julieanne Kost. Thanks for watching.